Thank you very much. Great to be here, and I want to say a big hello to everybody. This is not my first outing at TEDx, but so let me first of all congratulate TEDxMaitama, because I was at TEDx London, TEDx Houston some few years back. But then between then and now, I haven't changed in height, I haven't changed in complexion, but I wasn't wearing a cross. Now I have a bigger cross, which means I have a much bigger status. First of all, I think the whole idea, whoever came up with this idea of what now, couldn't have been more prophetic. The theme itself is elastic. The concept is quite fascinating. I'm very fascinated because we can talk endlessly about the concept, both as individuals, as communities, as nations, and literally as a world concept. What now? Imagine a young man struggling to get into university, young girl struggling to get into university. He or she finally gets into university amidst all the difficulties in Nigeria, finally graduates. What now? Now I've got a certificate. What next? A boy and a girl fall in love. They're desperate to get married. They finally do get married. The day after the wedding, what next? What now? I guess the World Cup is about to end, and when it does end and somebody lifts up the cup, we say, what next or what now? I think we're at a very difficult time in Nigeria. It doesn't need repeating, it doesn't need saying. And indeed, we have to pose the question, what now? When we close and end the battle with Boko Haram or against Boko Haram, we have to ask the question, what now? When we conclude our elections, whoever wins or whoever loses, we have to ask the question, what now? The question itself is philosophical, but it's critical for human survival. And for us in Nigeria, let me first of all speak to the issues. You know, there used to be a musical group called Third World. I don't know whether they still exist. I don't hear their music any longer. But they used to sing a song which was actually a very favorite song of mine. It says, now that we found love, what are we gonna do? Where the young girl is already dancing. Let's leave it there. But yes, now we found independence. What are we going to do with it? Now we ended military rule in Nigeria. What are we going to do? Now we've ended with Fulani headsmen or whatever name we may call them. What next? Now the question, what next, also speaks to history. But fundamentally, it speaks to vision. And it speaks to the vision of whether it's an individual or a young couple that has decided to get married, or a young undergraduate who enters the university. What next simply means, now that I'm in the university, I aim to get a first class, or I want to graduate as the best in my class. Or now we finally got married, what are we going to do? We have to make sure that the vows that brought us together are fulfilled. So for us as a country, we pose the question for Nigeria, what now? And unfortunately for us in Nigeria, this is not a question that our politicians have asked. It's not a question that the successive generals who kept staging coups managed to ask. Because had they asked the question, we probably would have been a much better society and a much better country than we are now. If you listen to the speeches of coup plotters from 1966, right through to the last coup in 1994, staged by General Abacha, not to talk of the attempted coups. But every time a coup was staged, if you read the speeches of the coup plotters, you will find that they were always, one, written in a hurry, and two, evidence of an uncompleted text. Because almost every time they staged a coup, after they've read the speech, they always ended up by telling us to stay by our radios, because evidently, people who have staged the coup are not yet ready. We had to stay by our radios because perhaps they hadn't made up their mind who was going to be head of state. They've not made up their mind what they want to do for Nigeria. They've not made up their mind about who is going to be in the team and who is not going to be in the team. The result is the faltering history of our country and the fact that our country continues to literally remain so severely fractured speaks to the issue of the vision or lack of vision of those who have governed Nigeria. Not only the military, story is not too different with our political class. From independence till date, what we've had are a bunch of people, good people in many respects, but stumbling into power with no text, with absolutely no idea what they're going to do with power. In part because successive presidents have always been brought from somewhere on parachutes to become presidents of Nigeria. Okay, and as you know, our current president, President Buhari himself, had said he was retiring from politics, but he was literally compelled to go back into politics. The result of all this is that we have a severely, as I say, severely fractured nation that is neither going nor coming. And every time a government comes in, it proves to be worse than the one that came before. So what now? Now, if you look at the history of nations, and I just pick 3 countries. First, the United States of America. By no means, not a perfect society. No society strives for perfection, in part because we are human beings. Perfection belongs only to God. We as ordinary humans can try to do the will of God. We will stumble, we will fall, we will sin, we will confess, we will sin again and we will confess. So life in itself for us, whether as Christians or Muslims, is an endless tale of apologies, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Abraham Lincoln became a post-war president in the United States of America, and I think the best place to look is a speech that one of the shortest speeches in history, only 275 words, the Gettysburg speech, which was written in 1863. Now, in the speech, very short speech, because it is at that speech that more or less Abraham Lincoln laid the foundation for why America must become a democratic society. Because the speech opened with a quotation from the 1776 Declaration of Independence, when Americans said very clearly, the founding fathers, we sign on to the proposition that all men and women are created equal. Consequently, the Gettysburg speech focuses on the sacrifices of those who had already died in the war. The speech was delivered in an environment of massive devastation. Corpses, broken buildings, broken houses, broken infrastructure. But then one word that appears in that speech at least 4 times is the word dedication. And Abraham Lincoln doesn't want Americans to pity those who have given their lives. But he makes the point that from their blood, from their sacrifices, a greater nation must emerge. And that we don't owe the dead our tears. What we owe the dead, in reality, is a sacrifice. To ensure that the reasons for why they died, that they didn't die in vain. Now, we leave Abraham Lincoln and look at Mandela, about which most of us already know. After his years imprisonment, Mandela comes out. He looks back at the sacrifices. He looks back at those who have made the sacrifices. He looks back at what he fought for. The ANC was founded in 1922. Mandela came out of prison in 1990. What happened in between? What happened in between is a story of imprisonment, death, widows, widowers, orphans, story of sacrifice. And so Mandela then decided that the best thing he would do, the only legitimate sacrifice he can make for the people of South Africa, contrary to what some of us think, is not that he decided to do only one term, no. It is that he believed that it was important, against the backdrop of all the pain, the suffering of those who had gone before, and the sacrifices that had kept the light of the struggle for human freedom alive, needed to be rewarded. And he rewarded it by insisting that his victory was not a victory for black people. And that his victory was not a victory for the oppressed alone. It had to be victory for the victor. Because in justice, people say justice is a 3-way street. There has to be justice for the perpetrator, justice for the victim, and justice for the larger society. And as a result, he decided to design a template, what came to be known as the Rainbow Coalition. And that Rainbow Coalition for Abraham Lincoln had to have the characteristics of a rainbow. Because the rainbow suggests to many of us that thunderstorms, heavy rainfalls are not going to come. The result is the relative peace and stability that enable South Africa, rather than turning into an ocean of blood, of revenge, it enabled South Africa to lay a foundation for a much more democratic society. Because when Mandela came out of prison on the 11th of February 1990, I'm sure the question he asked himself is, what now? How do I recover the 27 years I've lost? What now? My wife and my children have not seen me. What now? I have to go out of my way to make sure that I lay a foundation that will ensure that they never suffer again. But Mandela looked beyond himself, looked beyond his immediate comfort. But no, he was definitely not a perfect human being. But everything that happened in South Africa then as now suggests very clearly that there was a lot of thinking. So the critical question as to what now is to ask the philosophical question, what is my role? What do I want for myself, for as an individual, as a family, then by extension as a larger society? When people say the husband is the head of the family, it's not necessarily an economic proposition. There are many households where the father is probably earning far less or even jobless, and the mother is the one who is earning the money. Many might argue that actually we should be thinking about the mothers or the wives, that actually the women should be the head of the household. Well, because we are Africans, because we are in a patriarchal society, which privileges the man over the woman. Acceptable? Not really, by any stretch of the imagination. But when you talk about the head of the family, you are trying to approximate the notion that there has to be somebody with a bit of a vision about what this family should look like. And it is that vision that fits into what the children do and what the mother does. So the point is, 50 years, 60 years after independence, the troubles we had after the Civil War, the text of the speech of Major Nzogu in 1966, January 15th, if you take it and read it today, basically the same story. Nzogu was talking about corruption, talking about, fighting corruption and ending corruption, and making it possible for ordinary citizens to feel proud to be Nigerians, because he said, we've staged this coup because we don't want anybody who is a citizen of Nigeria to feel inadequate. Today, about 50 years later, we're not the happiest people on earth. I don't know what the reasons are, but war has not ended. Blood has not ended. What now? To answer that question, we must also think a bit more clearly about the nature of the injuries that have been inflicted on this nation. It's not enough for us to complain about what the politicians have done, or what the president has done or not done, or what the governor has done or not done. It's not enough to complain about what the military did. I just make the references to them, one, in order to state where we are. But I think what is most important and most significant is that we need, going forward, to think a little bit more clearly about where are we, how are we hurting, and why are we hurting? Because every segment of this country is hurting. People who are from the south think, well, we are suffering because the northerners have taken over everything. Northerners say, well, we are suffering because the southerners control almost all the economy. The minority say we complain because the dominant ethnic groups are the ones that are persecuting us. Truth of the matter, we are in this together. We either hang together or we will hang separately. By 1989, a historian recorded, who was actually he was very much involved with the JAMB examinations. And he said that by 1989, only about 8,000 of the millions of young people sitting for JAMB wanted to read history. And it may not, the very fact that history has been taken out of the Nigerian university syllabus and other institutions, or at least at the level of secondary school education and primary school and so on, may not be unconnected with the fact that perhaps people realize that fewer and fewer Nigerians were interested in history. And I make the point that it is precisely because we are not interested in history, top to bottom. That's why we've ended up where we have ended up. You all know the saying, you don't correct the mistakes of history. History has a way of repeating itself. We are not in agreement about any narrative in Nigeria, but clearly every segment of this country has suffered, but we have suffered differently. So if you ask what now, my immediate answer is we must come back to the table and design a coherent history or historical account of the history of Nigeria in a way and manner that does not continue to blame one group or the other. The Southeast will say, we remember Biafra. The Southwest will say, we remember what happened to us under Operation Wetier. The Middle Belt will talk about the Tiv riots and the almost endless crisis. The Northeast is the epicenter of conflict and violence in Nigeria today. The Northwest, well, tragically, I'm Bishop of Sokoto, and until only last week, a journalist interviewed me actually as late as last week, wanted to know from me, why is it that Sokoto is so peaceful? Now we've also been baptized by the violence of the headsmen or criminals, whatever you call them. So no part of this country has been left untouched. The question, therefore, is that if we're going to move forward, we must move forward together. And this is where leadership then becomes important. This is where vision then becomes important. And I'm very much enamored of the notion of the TEDx conversations. And I've listened to quite a good number of them. I wish I could be as eloquent as a lot of the young men and young women that I have listened to. What this does is gives me a lot of hope and a lot of confidence. And that tomorrow is going to be much better, not because our economies will grow. Tomorrow is going to get better, not because we will have more resources or our populations will grow bigger. Tomorrow is going to get better, not necessarily because Nigeria's oil prices will go up by whatever percentage. Tomorrow is going to be better, not by virtue of the kind of leader that we have in Nigeria, whether it's male, female, whether it's Christian or Muslim. Tomorrow is going to be better because when I look at the young people of today across the world, I get a sense that the world will be a better place. And I make the point because the dynamism, the energy, the sheer brilliance, the opportunities that are now available to us suggest very clearly that perhaps we need to start taking our attention away from the notions that we have about leadership and office in Africa and other parts of the world. It's only in Africa, largely because of the lack of development, the decaying infrastructure, the intensity of corruption. This is the reason why we continue to look up to old men, young and old men who are holding office. And we continue to deceive ourselves that the future lies in what the governors will do or what the president will do. Well, I've got news for you. If we focus on what our politicians are ever going to do in Nigeria, maybe I exaggerate, but I'm convinced that politics in Nigeria has then as now been largely a criminal enterprise. Now, the hostage taking will not end. The corruption is not about to end, and don't deceive yourself. It is the oxygen that drives everything in Nigerian life. To fight corruption, the only reason and the only way you can fight corruption is through the kind of technology that young men and women are coming up with now. Corruption is not a function of, lack of morality. No. And you're not going to resolve the problems of corruption by mere moral exhortation. This is what the Holy Quran says. This is what the Holy Bible says. No, we're not running a theocracy. We're running a democracy. So you're going to end corruption purely and simply by innovation, technological innovation, which is going to make it increasingly difficult even for the best thief to be able to succeed. Unfortunately for us in Nigeria, because the thieves are ahead of us, This is precisely the reason why things are so difficult for us. So, the frontiers of the future are conquerable. They are the subject of imagination. So what we are looking for is not so much the concern of who is governing us and how they are going to govern us. If you are waiting for the perfect president or the perfect governor, he's never going to come. It's never going to happen because, as I said, perfection is in the realm of the divine, not the human. So, what now? Let me end. There's a story of a little boy who's doing very well in school, very well. When his results came out, took the results to the father. The father looked at the results. The father looks and says, "Oh my God, what happened? You have an average of 80%. How come you got 30% in history?" The young man scratched his head and said to the father, "Daddy, I tried, but every question they asked happened before I was born." Now, whether Nigeria's decay started before you were born or after you were born, the challenge of fixing our country rests with each and every one of us. Because the problem started with one person. The solution will have to start with one person. And that person could be you. God bless you. And thank you very much for your attention.